Welcome to the Independent Learner Podcast. Here we talk honestly about what it means to raise curious, confident learners outside conventional school. Brought to you by Mosaic, we share real conversations, practical ideas, and honest stories from people living learner-led lives every day. Let's dive in. Hello, today's episode is called When Educators Become Parents. What changes when it's your child? We're talking about what happens when educators leave the system they once worked in and choose a different path for their own children. I am joined by Leslie Bray and Dan Moeller, both former educators who left the system when they had their own children and embraced independent learning. We'll talk about what it felt like to unlearn old assumptions, rebuild trust in their kids' natural curiosity, and navigate the emotional and practical transition to unschooling. We will also discuss insights from the recent Mosaic and Institute for Self-Directed Learning survey that asked current and former teachers why they left the conventional system and the impact the decision had on their family. Now a bit about our guests today. Dan Moeller is a teacher turned unschooling father, parenting coach, and advisor for self-directed education. He advocates consent, youth empowerment, and connection. He has an affinity for children, creativity, and organic play, having spent much of his life as a teacher and around families. He partners with his son on their Unschooling with Kai podcast and their hilarious chapter book, Bunny Stampede. Leslie Bray is a former classroom teacher turned unschooling parent. She guides parents, caregivers, and educators towards trust-centered, curiosity-led learning with self-awareness, connection, and community. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. All right, we'll get started with some grounding. We're seeing more and more educators choose a different path for their families. We surveyed 81 current and former educators, 92% of which said their children's experience in school was the reason they sought alternatives. When you hear that number, what resonates with you? Dan, you want to go first?
Educators have a unique perspective, and it's very telling if they won't entrust their children to the conventional school system. I've seen, kind of their overrepresentation in homeschooling, in self-directed education. And again, I just think that's very telling.
Yeah, I would say the same as when I was teaching all those years ago. I was surprised by the number of educators that did not have their children in public school. Um, it was either private or smaller schools or just different. It was homeschooling wasn't necessarily on the radar then as it is now. But I think educators were always looking for another setting for their children because they understood it wasn't working.
What do you think is driving that shift among educators who once believed deeply in the system?
I'll jump in and say, I think we believed we could change it. I know I started with the idea of, oh, I'm going in, I have all these great ideas, all this energy. I'm going to connect with these young people and we're going to do something different. And it's not until after a couple of years being in a system that you keep hitting up against that you're seeing you might be making individual changes in a classroom, but you're not changing the overall system dynamics. And the system does what it does. And I think teachers start with the flame and the passion of doing something new and innovative. And then we're beat with the, you can't do that, you can't do that. And it's kind of disheartening.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say much of the same. The one word I was thinking about was disenchantment. I think teachers have become very disenchanted. Even, being pushed not to do the research-based methods that they know would work, and being told that just won't work here or nobody else does that. And I think there's another piece that it's, teachers will do everything that they can for other children, students in their classrooms. But when it comes to their own children, now they have agency to choose, whereas they didn't with other people's children. So it's kind of a different light.
How do you think that disenchantment or disillusionment changes when you become a parent yourself?
I know for me, I gave myself permission to just live. So it wasn't about here's a bunch of checklists that I have to do. I have to make sure we've done this for an X amount of time. Um, it was giving myself space to expand. And that's something I never had in a classroom setting.
Yeah, again, much of the same. It's doing the best you can with what you have, and you can only do so much with other people's children. As you know, as hard as teachers are trying to make, the best realities that they can, but with your own children, you just have more options.
Mhm.
What was that moment or series of moments when you realized that what you were seeing in your own child didn't match what you believed about learning as an educator?
I worked
I
so closely, sorry,
oh,
yeah, I
go
worked
ahead.
so closely with my son because we were in a preschool setting. I was a teacher that turned into an administrator in a preschool setting, and it was a very progressive preschool. It was interest based, so I was seeing a lot of like kind of the science backside of it. But I was also going through student teaching, and for me, it was a harrowing experience. Kind of seeing the things that like I was already on the side of youth. I was already, empathetic, thinking about in ways that I can inspire, bring joy to children, connect on relationship. And so much of that gets sucked away in the classroom, not because of the teachers. Again, I just want to say that it's because of what they have to do and the lack of agency in teaching, how they want to, and how they learn to teach.
Mhm.
Mhm, mhm. I think some moments for me were took place in the classroom. So it took place watching how what happens if I don't have to control this situation? That control, micromanaging, timelines are just so strict in a system. And what happens if I say, instead of 15 minutes to get this done, I give the kids an hour? So I was practicing some of my ideas about other ways of learning in the classroom. So by the time I had my own children, there was, again, I don't have to control this for learning to happen. I don't have to micromanage this for learning to happen. And I think that's an unlearning I started doing before my children arrived.
Many educators in the survey that we did described that early tension as dissonance. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think the shift, the being a teacher is something different than being human. And for me, realizing, like, I remember as a new teacher, I got a book, First Days of School or something like that. And it said that as a teacher, I should not be smiling or laughing with my students. How absurd. You know, how are they going to get to know me and trust me and want to learn from me if I have to be this brick at the front of the classroom? And so that's the beginning of my no, I'm gonna laugh, we're gonna joke, we're gonna have a good time, we're gonna have um, joy here as we learn. And I think those were things that didn't make sense in the classroom, all under the guise of a classroom management, having good performance, meeting these marks. Those became less things I was striving for the longer I was with children. They're human. They want to engage, they want to tell you their stories, and none of that's on a lesson plan. And so realizing that the shift between being a thing as opposed to being human.
Mm.
Yeah, I was happy to get out. As much as I knew I would miss the children, the teachers, the faculty, I think this was because of the word you used, dissonance, this ever-growing dissonance, disenchantment. And it's funny how the dissonance didn't dissolve once I got out too, because I think it just turned into the deschooling work that I was doing. And it was just picking apart the pieces of that dissonance one by one and trying to figure them out.
Interesting, interesting. You touched on this a little bit. particularly you, Leslie, sort of some of the changes you were trying to make from within. The survey that we did showed that two-thirds of educators tried to change the system from within, but ultimately found it wasn't designed for autonomy, as you've said, or personalized learning. Did you go through a similar process? Sounds like you did. And what kind of changes did you try to push for, both of you, in your classroom or schools before deciding it wasn't enough?
Yeah, I know something I did was change the atmosphere, turning off the fluorescent lights, getting incandescent lighting, having aromatherapy, using music, different seating arrangements, more movement. Like I did all of those types of things. Um, and in the greater school community, pushing back against recess. Why are we not letting the kids outside? um, Inviting more parental involvement, letting parents see that they were part of their child's team and that we don't have to be pitted against each other. Those things made differences for moments, but they were not lasting change.
Mm,
There was only so much agency I had as trying to get certified as a teacher. In the classroom, I was waiting on a grade. I was waiting on certification. So, I tried to be creative, but still in the end, I was looking for that grade, looking to be certified. But in preschool, I there I experienced so many like money making directives from above and teachers pushing for more and more academics, which is not the same as we see in or as I really experienced in elementary school, middle school, things like that. And it seemed like these teachers were pushing more and more for academics, maybe either to curry favor with the parents, to prove themselves as good educators, or just because they didn't know any better. And the more and more that they had pushed for like earlier academics, the more the kids were fighting back. It didn't make any sense. Um, but in conventional school, it just felt like all personalized learning is and has been stripped away when you're dealing with 25 to 30 kids in a room.
so this transition that you both made, it's emotional. Leaving a system you once championed, I can't imagine is simple. What emotions came up for you during that transition?
I think I missed the rhythm of being in the classroom. I did enjoy it for as much as I could enjoy it. I missed my students, interacting with them, listening to their stories, seeing their eyes light up when they got something. The connections with different colleagues I had at the school, just not seeing them from day to day. Those are the people and the connections were what I missed.
Mm.
Yeah, I did miss being the preschool teacher that would have fun with kids outdoors when all the other teachers were just like that was their time to check out. That was my time to really connect with kids. And I didn't have this curriculum pushing me to do something specific, check this box. Um, so many emotions, joy, relief, sadness, but also isolation. And I think in the past, Mosaic has asked questions about like, are you a dipper? Are you a jumper? I've never been a jumper. But I had worked so much to this point that once I found out about self-directed education, I was a jumper. It just, yeah.
Which is a perfect segue into my next question, which was early on. Many parents in the survey said they wanted to prove their kids were still learning. Did you experience that pressure to reassure others and yourself?
Yeah, 100% I did. I would like to lie and say, no, we did this perfectly. We have a podcast that started off as a way of showing like the visible learning that we were doing. I have an Instagram where, if you look back 2, 3, 4 years ago, I was a lot more about proving how much this works. The people that I talk to and how that I explain things. And again, it was highly leaning on the visible learning, which, after a few years in self-directed education, you start recognizing how much of it is invisible. And you only recognize that when you start seeing like things pop up and surprise you and your son comes to you and tells you about this awesome thing that you learned that you had no idea was happening for the last 3 weeks, kind of under your own nose.
Yeah, yeah, I can resonate with that. I think because I am a former educator, people assume that I had it together. But it was my own internal pressure, I think, was even more than outside pressure. There was outside pressure, but it was more me remembering what a 7-year old should be doing now. And is my child doing that? And oh no, but we're doing something different. So always it's that deschooling process. It's giving myself permission to question, why is this coming up for me? My children have never been in conventional settings, and so they didn't know what they didn't know, necessarily. That wasn't their own fear, that was my fear. And so having people to talk to about that helped me, because it still comes up, like even after all these years of being doing this thing, it still comes up. I still get unnerved, and feel like, have I done everything I need to do? And so just to let everyone know, I don't think that ever fades. It just kind of, you have more ability to deal with it.
Mhm, mhm. One parent put it simply in the survey. They said they don't need to be taught, they need to trust.
Mhm.
How does this idea begin to shape your home life? And what did that look like for you?
It really hit home for me when my son started becoming the resident expert on so many different topics, trains, planes, the immune system, maps. And I had to just be like, you know what? Kai's probably right on this one. I think he's got this. I wasn't fact checking him. I was like, you know what? I'm leaving it up to him, and that's kind of awesome.
Mhm. I think another way, because again, my children had lots of different interests. So it more than just being interest led, learning to trust them, trust their instincts, trust their nose, trust what their body is demonstrating. They may be saying, yes, I want to do it, but I can see your body saying no. So being really tuned in to them as people, as opposed to having a script, a schedule, or a curriculum that I have to get through.
So as you turn into them, it's really, I'm interested to see the changes and the shifts you saw in your children. Um, the data from our survey, 89% of parents saw more curiosity, 82% saw more interest, and 72% saw more happiness. So what is that? What do you think of when you hear those kind of big, stark numbers? What did that look like for you? And what does that look like for you today?
Early on, it looked like my children going very deep into whatever. Like I remember there were several seasons where dressing up was a thing, playing make believe, building forts, being outside and making stuff with sticks and bricks. It's just being children, enjoying where they are and not being rushed through it. I think coming back with the surprise of, mommy, look what I found. Um, those were the things that made me know we are on the right track.
Yeah, the agency that my son had, I think a little bit of the difference of my circumstances having gone from a preschool and kindergarten that were interest led into unschooling. It was, a lot of the facets were already there. But then when we started unschooling, I remember my son explaining that unschooling is so much better because now he gets to choose what he wants to do, when he wants to do it. And he had so much freedom at that point. And I think, a little bit for myself too, I started, as I noticed that for my son, I started noticing that for me. And I'm like, you know what? Why am I not choosing as well? How can I unschool myself as well? And that opened up a lot of doors and gave me a lot of insight into his world.
Beautiful. Interesting. Over half of the educators that we surveyed said this transition reshaped their family values. You just touched on this a bit, Dan. What new markers of success matter for you both?
Yeah, I think confidence and self-awareness, having agency, um, being able to explore all forms of creativity, cooperation, and collaboration, sharing when appropriate, whether it's sharing a thing or sharing your ideas, connection, absolutely. And I think that autonomy is what builds up that confidence.
Just adding to Leslie's list, relationship, partnership, youth empowerment.
Mm, love it. How do you navigate challenges or conversations with people who see grades and benchmarks as the main indicators of learning?
I think for me, it's now, it's listening with great curiosity. I think it's biting my tongue in a way that I didn't before, and really taking the time to determine if they're open to criticism or other possibilities, devil's advocacy. Hey, this is a perspective, and most people might not be, and that's okay.
Mhm, mhm. I think I'm there as well. The conversations were usually my asking, what does an A mean? Like, what does it actually mean? What does a C mean? And listening for what the answer is. And based on that, exploring, do I let that just be or do I explore? Now I know, since my young people have chosen higher ed, talking about grades now with them looks different because one, that we didn't have grades, but then understanding, what does this A or C mean? Does it really mean you know the information, or does it just mean you only did this much of the assignments? Like, so understanding that it's nuanced and it doesn't necessarily mean knowledge or success even.
In our survey, nearly three-quarters of educators said what they needed most wasn't a curriculum, it was community. And Leslie, you touched on this earlier today, earlier in this conversation when you needed to touch base with other folks when you
Mhm.
started. What forms of support mattered and matter most to you, as is particularly in those early months when you made the transition?
When we started, we were looking for anyone to help us feel less isolated, and at least partially validated. I think at this point we have gravitated, having had those needs since met, we are now, actively looking for and in open-minded community. In the early months too, my parents' understanding of what we were doing really mattered a lot.
Mm.
Absolutely. Talking to parents, listening to their stories, talking to parents whose children were older than mine, so I could see, oh, what does that look like when they get to the teens? Just stories. Like Dan said, being in community with anybody to start with, and then becoming more selective once we noted what we needed as a family.
What would you say to an educator parent who is starting to question the system but feels alone or unsure of where to begin?
I would say trust that intuition. Like, if you're questioning, keep questioning, and go at your own pace. Like Dan just said, sometimes people can jump right in and change, and other people need more time. I was someone who had to do some research. I had to listen to some things and read some things and ask my own questions. All ways are valid. Do what supports you, but lean into that questioning because that's letting you know something.
My only regret was not having started earlier, and this is something I've heard again and again. And I'm not trying to create a sense of urgency. Um, I just didn't have the bravery to try something out that seemed radical and quote unquote unproven at the time. And I wish I did, like Leslie said, lean into that questioning a bit more earlier on.
That touches on you've lived both of you have lived both inside the conventional system and are now outside of the conventional system. What do you think is the greatest misconception about self-directed learning?
That it's a wild, scary place. There's no rules or no boundaries. We're just doing what we want to do. And in a sense, yes, but we're parenting more. So it's going to look like your home life, whatever your family needs. Some families need a certain structure. It'll be there. Some families need requirements. It'll be there. Some people need more space and time, and you'll put that there. So trusting what you need, you can create that rhythm for your family.
Yeah, along the same lines, I would say the idea that it is disconnected, that it's every kid for themselves, every family for themselves. It's not disconnected, and it's not unparenting, like Leslie said. It is very connected, very connected, very deep, and it is, community work as well.
From where you sit now, what feels most hopeful about this growing ecosystem of families embracing self-directed learning, the explosion of micro schools across the country, and more and more collaborative learning spaces? What feels most hopeful for you?
I think I feel most hopeful that we're reaching a critical mass for real change to start happening on a large scale, and a critical consciousness about education and the rights of young people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I would echo that, just to say people being willing to explore other ways. Like there's not just one way, and there are multiple ways, and we're finding other people willing to have those conversations and then do something about it.
Yep.
In the spirit of that, in that one way, if you're an educator and you're listening to this and you're quietly wondering what that other way could be, what is one small step they can take after hearing this conversation?
I would say read the Book of Learning and Forgetting, read Untigering, read Raising Free People, and just take a peek into what possibilities are.
I would say question one assumption you're holding. Question it. Might be pacing or compliance or what real work looks like, and loosen your grip on it and see what arises, see what comes up, get curious about it, see what possibilities.
So in closing, if you could speak to your earlier educator self, the one who was still trying to make the system work, what would you want them to know?
Get out.
For me, you have anxiety, Dan, and you will find your own agency soon enough.
No, I love it. All right. And finally, what feels most different in your home now? Now that trust and curiosity are at the center of your family's learning life.
I mean, it just feels like life. It's warm, it's cozy, it's connected. We can face anything together.
Yeah. Yeah, the same. Learning is life. There are not separate times of the day or compartments of our minds. This means less pressure coming from me, less pressure coming from the outside world, less to worry about. The expectations are our own. We get to set them and change them and be flexible. And holiday celebrations are our own, and that's super fun.
It's wonderful. Leslie, Dan, thank you for joining us today. Really, really appreciate the conversation, and wishing you the happiest of holidays.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Happy holidays.
Thank you for spending time with the Independent Learner Podcast. If today sparked new ideas or questions, you're not alone. You can find more conversations and support through the Mosaic Collective at mosaic-collective.org. We're glad you're here.